Let's talk about India, where a really shocking public health crisis blew up into this huge legal battle. The problem? Food adulteration was absolutely rampant. It turned out a critical gap in the law was putting millions of people at risk, and it actually took the country's highest court to step in and demand a change. I mean, seriously, just think about that for a second. It's a horrifying thought, right? But believe it or not, this isn't some made-up horror story. It was the very real, very dangerous situation that set off alarm bells across the nation and forced a complete rethink of India's food safety laws. And the scale of this problem? It's just staggering. A national survey by India's Food Safety Authority, the FSSAI, found that over two-thirds, a massive 68.4% of milk samples tested across the country were not up to standard. We're not talking about a few bad apples here. This was a full-blown systemic crisis. So to really get our heads around how this happened, and more importantly, what's being done about it, we're going to walk through 5 key parts of the story. First, we'll look at the dangerous problem itself. Then the outdated law that was failing to stop it. We'll get into the confusion caused by having 2 different laws for one crime, see how the Supreme Court made an urgent call for action, and finally break down the really smart solution they came up with, a proportional punishment. Okay, so what was the final straw? Well, it all kicked off with a public interest lawsuit that landed in the Supreme Court of India. The case was Swami Achyutanand Tirth versus the Union of India, and it dragged the terrifying and growing menace of synthetic milk right into the spotlight. And you have to understand, the court was shown exactly what was in this so-called milk. And we are not talking about just watering it down to cut corners, no way. The list of adulterants included things like industrial urea, detergent, caustic soda, even refined white paint. This stuff was being mixed into milk that was then sold to families and given to kids. So this goes way beyond just poor quality food. The Supreme Court pointed out that drinking these chemicals is incredibly dangerous. We're talking about severe damage to your heart, your liver, your kidneys, and it's even been linked to cancer. This was a direct, life-threatening attack on public health. Now, you're probably wondering, wait a minute, weren't there any laws against this? Well, yes, there were. But, and this is the crazy part, they were unbelievably weak. The main law being used was basically a relic from the colonial era, and as a deterrent, it was completely useless. I mean, just look at this. The disconnect it's just unbelievable. Under Section 272 of the Indian Penal Code, which dates all the way back to 1860, the absolute maximum punishment for deliberately poisoning food was just 6 months in jail or a fine of 1,000 rupees. That's about $12. For a crime that could kill someone, the penalty was a joke. So you'd think the solution is simple, right? Bring in a new modern law to fix these old problems? Well, that's exactly what India did. But here's the twist. Instead of solving the problem, it accidentally created a massive legal mess. Okay, so here's a quick timeline of how it all went down. For more than a century, that old 1860 penal code was the main tool. Then, in 2006, Parliament passes the Food Safety and Standards Act, or FSSA. It's a modern law designed to be a one-stop shop for regulating the entire food industry. When it fully kicked in 2011, it was supposed to clear everything up.
But it didn't. Instead, it created this huge conflict. In a big case involving PepsiCo, a high court ruled that the new, specialized FSSA had basically eclipsed the old provisions of the penal code. They said the old law was now redundant. And that was a huge problem because it meant the police could no longer use that old law to make quick arrests for food adulteration. The Law Commission of India later dug into this, and what they found was that these 2 laws were fundamentally trying to do 2 different things. The old IPC was all about punishment. It was punitive. It treated this as a crime against the state and let police act fast. But the new FSSA, it was regulatory. It was all about improving the food industry with a much slower, more complicated process. This clash created a kind of legal paralysis.
So, you've got the public in real danger, and a legal system that's basically gridlocked. Who's going to step in and fix this? Well, the Supreme Court of India decided it was time to break the deadlock. As the court was hearing this synthetic milk case, they looked at the legal mess and realized just how dangerous it was. If the authorities couldn't act decisively against people selling poisoned milk, lives were literally at risk. They knew they had to force a change. And they didn't just talk about it. In their final judgment, they issued a crystal clear directive. The court said that the government needed to make suitable amendments in the penal provisions to make them a real deterrent. It was a direct order. Fix this broken law now. So, with that direct mandate from the Supreme Court, the government had to act. They passed the job over to the Law Commission of India, the country's top legal think tank. Their mission? Come up with an elegant solution to this very, very messy problem. And what they came back with was a framework built on a simple yet incredibly powerful legal idea. And that idea is the principle of proportionality. Now, it might sound complicated, but it's really just common sense. The punishment should fit the crime. So, instead of one weak blanket penalty, the Commission proposed a system where the consequences for the criminal directly match the harm they caused to the victim. Here's how their proposed system works. It amends the old penal code and creates 4 tiers. If the adulterated food causes no injury, the punishment is lighter. But if it causes a minor or non-grievous injury, the penalty goes up. For a serious, grievous injury, it jumps to 6 years in prison. And, this is the big one, if the adulterated food causes someone's death, the punishment is a minimum of 7 years in prison all the way up to life, plus a massive fine. And there's one more really crucial piece to this. The new law directs that any fine collected from the person who did this has to be paid directly to the victim. That money is specifically for helping cover their medical bills and recovery costs. It's a way of making sure that justice isn't just about punishment, but also about healing. So we've gone from a terrifying public health crisis to a really smart legal solution that finally makes the punishment fit the crime. But, the journey from a law on a piece of paper to reality on the ground is a long one. This proposal creates a powerful deterrent, no doubt. But the ultimate question still hangs in the air. Will this be enough to finally make food in India safe to eat?